way back in the 60s and 70s. Beer was simpler, cheaper, harsher, and somehow better. And if you ever wondered what happened to them, you'll love this video. Let's take a trip to the golden age of dad beers. Ringold. Now, unless you're a time-traveling grandpa or just really into vintage beer lore, chances are you've never tasted this bad boy. But back in the day, I'm talking 1950s into the swinging 60s. Ringold wasn't just a beer. It was a New York icon. This was the beer of the Big Apple. That's right. If you were watching a Dodgers game when they actually played in Brooklyn, chances are someone was sipping a Ringold nearby. It wasn't fancy. It didn't have notes of toasted hazelnuts or floral hops like today's hipster brews. No, sir. Ringold tasted like beer, plain, crisp, cold, and maybe slightly metallic if you left the can in the sun. But hey, it got the job done. And here's the kicker. They had a beauty contest to pick their spokeswoman. The Miss Ringold contest. It was like The Bachelor, but for beer sales. Women would campaign, like they were running for office, vote for Missy Ringold 1962, and people actually cared. New Yorkers were more invested in this than in mayoral elections. I'm not even kidding, but like many things in New York, Ringold fell victim to the times. People started reaching for Bud and Miller instead. Eventually, the brand dried up. Poof. They tried a comeback in the early 2000s, with all this heritage nostalgia stuff. But let's be honest, it wasn't the same without the beauty, Queens and the Bronx attitude. But this next beer was a whole saga. Falstaff, named after Shakespeare's lovable drunk Sir John Falstaff. Yeah, they really leaned into the whole, we know you're drinking this to forget about work vibe. This beer had a loyal, blue-collar fan base. It tasted like what beer was supposed to taste like. Bold, malty, and just a little bit bitter. No apricot infusions or citrus-forward mouthfeel, just beer. The kind of stuff you drank after mowing a half-acre lawn or losing $10 on a horse named Lucky Joe. And it sold like crazy. At one point, Falstaff was the third largest beer company in America. Imagine that. Beating out big names and rolling in beer-soaked glory. You could find it at every barbecue, VFW hall, bowling alley, and probably half the fishing boats on the Mississippi. But like most tragic heroes, Falstaff flew too close to the sun. They went on a buying spree, snatching up regional breweries like they were on a monopoly binge and spread themselves too thin. Quality dropped. The flavor that once said, I work hard, I drink harder, started saying, we rushed this through production to meet quarterly. There was a brief moment in the early 2000s when you could find it in a dusty gas station in the middle of nowhere. Schlitz, let me set the scene. It's the mid-20th century. The economy's booming, the suburbs are growing, and Schlitz is the number 2 beer in America, right behind Budweiser. That's not a small feat. This wasn't some underdog. Schlitz was a beer giant. Their slogan was literally, the beer that made Milwaukee famous. Forget Harley-Davidson, forget cheese curds. Schlitz was Milwaukee's pride and joy. And it tasted like beer, you know, real beer. Kind of grainy, kind of bitter, kind of sharp. The kind of thing you drank after changing your own oil or yelling at the TV during a football game. It wasn't fancy, it wasn't trying to be. It was your dad's beer, your granddad's beer, and probably the reason a few of your uncles exist. Now here's where it gets wild. In the 1970s, Schlitz made what may be one of the dumbest business decisions in beer history. In an effort to cut costs and make more beer faster, they secretly changed the formula. And not just a little tweak, they basically said, what if we added more chemicals and made it taste worse, but faster? Genius. Then came the final nail, the infamous drink Schlitz or I'll kill you ad campaign. Okay, that's not the exact wording, but the commercials had this intense, over-the-top drama that made it look like drinking Schlitz was a matter of life and death. Viewers were confused, and also terrified. Not a great combo for selling beer. By the 1980s, Schlitz was toast. Eventually, they tried to bring back the original 1960s recipe, like some kind of beer resurrection, but it was too late. The damage was done. The kingdom had fallen. Valentine IPA. First brewed way back in the 1800s, Valentine IPA really hit its stride in the 50s and 60s. And let me tell you, this thing was bold. Most beers back then were light, easy, forgettable. You drank 6 and forgot which brand you were even drinking. But Valentine IPA walked into the party like, I hope you brought your taste buds, nerds. This was a beer that actually tasted like hops, in an era when most Americans just wanted their beer to taste like cold water with a suggestion of barley. It had this piney, bitter edge that made you sit up and go, "Whoa, what is this?" It was complex, dry, and it had guts. And believe it or not, some beer nerds say it tasted kind of like today's Sierra Nevada Pale Ale, but stronger. But here's the problem. Valentine IPA was ahead of its time, and we all know what happens to people and beers that are too far ahead. They get weird looks and eventually get canned. Literally. But here's the twist. In the 2010s, Pabst brought it back. Like some archaeologist dusting off a forgotten treasure, they tried to recreate the original 1960s formula. And surprisingly, they didn't butcher it. It wasn't exactly the same, but it came close enough to bring back that nostalgic bitterness. Red, white, and blue? Let's just say Red, White, and Blue didn't win awards. It didn't try to. It was cheap, it was cold, and if you had a lawn to mow or a couch to collapse into after your shift at the plant, it was good enough. Taste-wise, imagine beer. Then take away the taste. Add some fizz. Maybe a whisper of corn. Boom. Red, white, and blue. It was the kind of brew that made you question your life choices halfway through the can. But hey, it was $3 for a six-pack, and it had America in the name, so who's complaining? But here's the thing. In the battle of budget beers, Red, White, and Blue was like the kid who gets picked last in dodgeball but shows up anyway because he brought snacks. It never stood out in taste or branding. It wasn't the rebel like Schlitz, the legend like Bud, or the mysterious outsider like Valentine. It was just there. Eventually, it faded away, like that guy at the party who nobody noticed left. By the late 70s and early 80s, it was discontinued. Not because people hated it, more like no one remembered to buy it. It was replaced by other bottom-shelf heroes, and just like that, another old-school brew bit the dust. So if you ever find an old RWB can in your grandpa's garage, don't drink it, unless you're doing a YouTube challenge. Just hold it up and give it a slow salute. It was patriotic, it was economical, and it tried its best. National Bohemian, aka Natty Bow. Now, flavor-wise, look, it was fine. Totally drinkable. If you're the kind of person who says, I just want a cold one and to not think too hard, this was your jam. Crisp, light, and vaguely malty, with just enough personality to say, I'm not water, but let's not get fancy here. You weren't sipping this and picking up notes of grapefruit and oak. You were pairing it with crab cakes and chain smoking on a stoop. And let's be clear, in the 60s and 70s, Natty Bow ruled the Mid-Atlantic like a benevolent beer monarch. Nearly 90% of its sales were in and around Baltimore. It was the beer of construction workers, dockhands, uncles, and anyone who thought a good weekend involved a fishing rod and a cooler full of ice. The advertising was actually kind of brilliant. Mr. Bow, the one-eyed mascot with a snazzy stash, became iconic. He was like the Monopoly guy if he ditched the top hat and started tailgating. They even had the slogan, "From the Land of Pleasant Living," which was adorable because that land was mostly sweaty, humid, and full of folks yelling about the Colts. But then came the classic beer tragedy, corporate acquisition. In 1975, Natty Bow's original brewery in Baltimore got shut down after it was bought out by a giant conglomerate. Locals were crushed. You could still buy the beer, but now it was being brewed in other states. It was like if someone took your grandma's lasagna recipe and handed it to a cafeteria worker in Ohio. It just wasn't the same. Blatz, beer with a name that sounds like either a sneeze or the sound your car makes when it dies in traffic. But once upon a time, Blatz was the pride of Milwaukee, back when Milwaukee was basically the Hollywood of beer. Now, Blatz wasn't some quiet little underdog. No. This beer was once a big deal. Like, competing with Pabst, Schlitz, and Miller kind of big. It was actually the first Milwaukee brewery to go national, and for a minute there in the 1950s and early 60s, they were doing victory laps around the beer industry. Every guy at the bowling alley had a Blatz in one hand and a cigarette in the other, solving all of life's problems in between frames. Taste-wise? It was one of those beers where you'd take a sip and think, well, it's beer all right. Light, a little bready, nothing crazy. No wild hops, no citrus nonsense. Just straight up middle-of-the-road lager. It didn't try to impress you, and you respected it for that. It was the blue-collar handshake of beers, firm, short, and over in 5 seconds. But let's talk branding. The old Blatz slogan was, "Blatz, Milwaukee's finest beer," which was bold, considering it shared the city with beer giants like Schlitz and Miller. It's like showing up to a family reunion in a crown and shouting, "I'm the best child." Sadly, Blatz hit a rough patch in the late 60s and 70s. The brewery changed hands more times than a used car with questionable mileage. Do you remember any of these beers, or is there anyone you know that should be on this list? Let us know in the comments, and if you haven't already, take a moment to subscribe to this channel. It only takes a second. See you in the next one.